Thank you very much. And like most stories, it begins, once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a young man who moved to New York City and dropped out of grad school and was hitting his Saturn return and wasn't really sure what to do with his life. So he decided, fuck it, might as well become a wizard. But how does one become a wizard? Well, he didn't really know, but he figured if he succeeded in becoming a wizard, then he would know, and that future wizard would know. So he decided to perform a magic ritual to ask his future wizard self to send magic back in time so that he could become a wizard. And guess what? It worked. And when I say it worked, what I mean is that about 30 days after performing the ritual, he went to go see a doctor for a rare knee condition he was suffering from. And the doctor told him, instead of doing surgery, what we're gonna do is we're gonna put you on an experimental medication that we are running the trial for at this hospital that just so happens to have the side effect of turning all of your hair white. So that seemed like the universe was giving him a pretty big thumbs up. And so from that point on, he dedicated himself to living his life as an answer to the question, what would a wizard do? It turned out a wizard would get some nice robes and wander around New York City and see what magical adventures he could get into. And that included riding the subway and granting wishes for commuters who are often confused that this was not for YouTube or this was not about money. This was just about an experience and interacting with strangers, which sometimes is the most magical thing we can actually have. That led to getting turned into a meme and many other things, which we're going to glaze over and get to the point where that wizard wrote a book called So Let It Be Written, a wizard's guide to metafiction with the incredible Eric Miller, who is a graphic novelist and artist. And then eventually, that book got turned into a talk called So Let It Be Written. And that was performed at the 2025 Occulture Conference. And the wizard came on stage and made a joke about taking LSD and then said, I'm going to tell you a story. And like many stories, it begins once upon a time. And at that point, he looked out at the audience directly and said, okay, I'm not going to do the entire presentation in third person. Don't worry. So yeah, we're here to talk about the magic of metafiction. So what is metafiction? Well, let's break it down. Meta comes to us from the Greek, meaning with, across, or after. And one of my favorite little bits of trivia here is, I'm sure you're all familiar with the word metaphysics. And that's actually the book that Aristotle wrote after physics. It just meant after physics. But then we kind of took that in the English language and went, oh, that means beyond and encompassing and this crazy thing. And he was like, this is just my second book. It was just the next book in the series. Make a whole thing out of it. But these days, we're inundated with this concept of meta. A fucking shitty technology company that I won't name stole that word because I didn't like being called Facebook, so now we have to deal with that. But anyways, I digress. Wow, the language in these slides has really transformed in an interesting way. That was not in the original PDF. Is this your fault? The devil in my PDF. Anyways, fortunately, I remember what I said, so we're good. So anyways, meta refers... Wait, you guys see that too. It didn't kick in early. Deep breaths. We got this. All right. Anyways, meta is generally thought of as work that is kind of self-aware, a little bit cheeky. It refers to itself or the conventions of its genre. And what the fucking shit? All right. That's hilarious. So my definition of metafiction is work that alludes to or acknowledges or refers to the wider context of its own existence. And that gives it a lot of really interesting narrative moves it can make. The first one is breaking the fourth wall. You might be familiar with this from our beloved Flammarion engraving, the occult Truman Show moment of getting out of ordinary reality to peer beyond the veil and see what really is. And we have this in a lot of mediums, specifically comic books are really fond of this. She-Hulk loves to tear herself out of the page and acknowledge that she's in a comic book. If anyone saw the Disney Plus She-Hulk TV show, at some point she literally crawls out of the show and gets into the Disney Plus menu. It's very meta. Then Deadpool, the merc with a mouth, in comic books was known for constantly breaking the fourth wall, mentioning that, yeah, I know what's about to happen. I flipped to the end of the comic book, or I read the last issue. I have this greater awareness that comes from this wider perspective. And again, as that character has made the jump into movies, the most recent Deadpool movie, Deadpool and Wolverine, is like half the plot is about the IP of Deadpool in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and what characters have been used and which ones haven't and who actors played them. So like you kind of have to know the backstory of 20th Century Fox film studio to understand the context within the film itself. And then finally, we have the greatest example, in my opinion, which is Grant Morrison's Animal Man. So this was before Grant Morrison wrote The Invisibles, and he had plucked Animal Man out of obscurity, Animal Man being this kind of goofy, B-list hero that could take on the power of animals. And Morrison started injecting him with his own values. So he was a vegetarian, he cared about animal rights. And at some point, he goes out, Animal Man, the character, to a mesa and eats peyote buttons and has a moment of cosmic realization where he turns and sees you, the reader, and realizes, holy fuck, I can see you. And that leads to some very interesting things in Animal Man. So this direction, we can think of breaking the fourth wall as moving outside of the medium and going out, but there's also ways that we can go back in, and this can create delightful moments of recursion. So if you've seen Spaceballs, there's a great moment where they're trying to figure out where the other characters are, and they decide, I know, we'll watch the movie Spaceballs, and they start fast forwarding to figure out where they are, but that brings them up to the moment where they go, I know, we'll watch the movie Spaceballs, and they get this lovely recursive moment where they can see themselves on the screen, and there's some great banter about that's us now, when, now. But this is throughout film, especially these meta examples, we find ways of going inside the story and creating these layers. So Adaptation is a film written by Charlie Kaufman, who was assigned the task of adapting Susan Orlean's book, The Orchid Thief, and he was struggling with that, and he ended up writing a movie about a screenwriter named Charlie Kaufman, who's assigned the task of adapting Susan Orlean's book, The Orchid Thief, and is struggling with that. And as the film gets going, he starts to add more action sequences and Hollywood elements, and you see these layers becoming clearer. There's another delightful film I think is fairly underseen with Will Ferrell called Stranger Than Fiction. He's an ordinary guy living his life, and then one day he starts to hear a narrator just narrating his life. Just gets very confused by that and has to figure out what's going on. And so again, this isn't breaking the fourth wall. It's not ever acknowledging that he's a character in a movie, but it's exploring these tropes that we're familiar with of, if you've ever read a book, you understand the way a narrator is omniscient and can describe scenes. And so we see that layered in. And then, of course, we have the beloved never-ending story. A kid holds up in a spooky little bookshop, finds a book, and then as he's reading, it feels like he and that story are interacting in a strange way. Now, while many people love the 1980s film version, I just want to give a quick plug for the actual book by the German author Michael Ende. If you've never read it, it is fantastic, and it has a whole second half that they don't have in the movie version, where Bastian goes inside of the story, and then it really deconstructs the hero myth. and what an asshole heroes can often be. And there's a lot of great Taoist themes, and it's beautifully written, so treat yourself to that. So we now have this idea of going inside the story as well as breaking out of that fourth wall. And so this kind of going up and going down reminds me a little bit of as above, so below, as without, so within. So this occult concept is about the way that the different layers of reality reflect within reality itself. You know, we see this across Buddhism and other esoteric traditions, that this world is but a mirror of something else, something larger, something more ineffable and mysterious. And I think when you make these connections in a piece of metafiction and you're really going in both directions, you're kind of modeling this process. And my favorite example of this is Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. Now, this is a book of metafiction that begins, you are about to begin reading Italo Calvino's new novel, If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. Relax, concentrate, dispel every other thought, let the world around you fade. And from there, it's written in the second person, and it describes the process of trying to read this book, but you, the reader, who is also a character, keeps getting to the end of a chapter, and then there's a misprint in the book, so you have to go to the bookstore, and then they give you a fixed copy, but then you get the fixed copy, and that's a different book, and then it just ends up being this globe-trotting, fantastic story weaving in and out of fiction that ultimately is a meditation on what it means to be a reader. This weird psychedelic experience of sitting by yourself and having another person's thoughts deeply animated inside of your consciousness. And that was what I was trying to get at with my co-author, Eric Miller, when we wrote So Let It Be Written, A Wizard's Guide to Metafiction. Now, the backstory was I had been working on a book about my philosophy of wizardry, and it got overwhelming, and I was kind of stressing out, which then felt weird to be writing a book about a playful, laid-back, magical philosophy while I was stressing about it in real life. So at a certain point, I had to take a deep breath and say, you know what? I'm putting this project down for a bit. But if there's any occult publishers in the audience, please come talk to me afterwards. But I did an episode for my podcast about this on failure, and Eric reached out and said, dude, that resonated so much. I also had a book that I just finished, and I realized this does not belong in the world. This book is too angry. I wrote it for me. I'm not putting it out there. So we started corresponding via email, and we said, we should do something just for fun, just to kind of, get the lead out and get the creative juices going. And so we made this book as a hypersigil to activate our own creativity, and we included that email exchange in the actual book. So the book's context appears in it. And one of the things that inspired the book was conversations that I have been having with a dear friend of mine who happens to be a puppet named Zero. Zero, do you want to say hello? No, I'm feeling shy. Okay, that's fine. We'll come back to Zero later. But by talking to myself through a puppet, you have to get over the first stumbling block, which is it's going to feel silly. And for my philosophy of magic, I think that's a very important stumbling block to not just try and get around, but to actively embrace. And so while you can talk to yourself with a puppet on your hand, you can also talk to yourself through creative action by creating characters and seeing how they relate to you. And so that's what Eric and I did. We both ended up with these avatar characters that are constantly breaking the fourth wall, weaving in and out of the text. We appear in the text and have a conversation with them about their fictional nature as characters. And then we try and expand the book outside of the book itself by even asking the reader to stop what they're doing and write. So this becomes a hypersigil that invites them to also reactivate their own creative process and to play this weird game with us. And so that is the essence of the magic of metafiction. And once we have this kind of understanding of how metafiction works across these examples, we can get weird and really start to play with it. So let's think about meta as movement within the in-dimensional space of meaning, which is an idea that I stole from a really amazing Slovakian machine learning engineer named Karine Velis. And this is the most meta moment in this very meta presentation because it literally comes after. So thank you, Aristotle, we did it. But to brutally paraphrase Karine's amazing work, We can think about these transformations that you normally have in space, where something can be above something else, or further away, or to the left, or to the right. But when it comes to language, you can make these transformations where the words man and woman go in this direction that you've never thought about, called royal, and become king and queen, or this direction called age, where they become boy and girl. And these let us move around in planes that we don't normally think about. But as magicians, we do think about these planes. We have so many fun models that we like to create, maps of reality that show all of these different hierarchies and levels. And I think it's pretty quick in a magician's progress that they stop thinking heaven is something that you would reach if you send a rocket straight up. If you drill deep enough, you're going to find hell. And we realize these are dimensions that are a little bit different. But going even further, I believe that what metafiction helps us realize is this core principle of magic, which is you emulate your creator when you create. We find this in classic examples like the idea of creating a homunculus, and I forget if it was Eliade or Strauss, but the idea that ritual is the enactment of myth. So how do we all kind of play as God when we're trying to alter our reality, create things, and shift it, which is, of course, what artists do. But self-aware creations expand our capacity for self-awareness. They let us see our creation doing the thing that we're trying to do, and we find ourselves in this great chain of being. And here we come back to Animal Man, because after having this shattering psychedelic epiphany that, holy fuck, there's a reader out there somewhere, Animal Man is on a soul-searching journey that eventually ends with him breaking out of the box of the panel of a comic book and going to an encounter with Grant Morrison himself, who has written himself into the comic as this kind of smug writer persona. And they have a very lovely conversation in the finale of the series where Morrison is talking about the things from his personal life that he was exploring in this story. And again, we see these layers where he's able to reflect on his creative process, on the way that he was willing to use the personal tragedy of a cat dying as something to give his Animal Man story some more gravitas. And you get to really explore your own motivations when you see them clearly on a page, which is in essence the idea of journaling. I love this cover where we have Animal Man both sort of crucified and in the classic hangman position. And the hangman is that card of an alternate perspective, right? Hanging upside down to see the world in a different way and to take on new understanding. So if we put all of this together, we realize that you emulate your creator when you create self-aware creations, expanding your capacity for self-awareness. So instead of thinking about reality as an Ouroboros where it's eating its own tail, what if it's creating its own tail? What if it's this cyclical process of each layer of creation creating a new layer of creation, and round we go, and where it stops, nobody knows. Now, this brings up two really key ideas that I want to gift to all of you as the essence and the heart of this talk. The first is writing as magic. Now, this can be extremely profound and extraordinarily simple. The first exercise I will give you is journal in the third person. If you go home and you write, "Dear Diary, I had a great day at Occulture," okay, cute little journal entry. But if you go, "Dear Diary, the wizard Devin Person had an amazing day at Occulture," suddenly we're like, where is this story going? Okay. And even when you come across challenges, they stop just being a problem. You're like, how is this character going to get out of this mess? They need to find a job. They need to get out of bed. All right, where are they going with this? And at the core of all of this, I am a guy dressed like a wizard. And I did that because I realized you can do whatever the fuck you want. It doesn't matter. Have you seen the world? It's broken. There are no rules anymore. And instead of trying to be very serious and go, no, this is my very devout belief system, there's no part of me that just liked fantasy novels too much as a kid, I put that part front and center and said, yeah, I liked fantasy novels. Who didn't? I mean, who in this room was not first exposed to magic through fiction, through something that showed you another world, a world that seemed more exciting than your own? And how can you bring that energy back into your reality? How can you choose your character class? And how can you get outside of the limited pathways of desire and stop thinking about, well, what do I want? And start thinking, well, what would my character do? How would I play this? If I was a wizard, what would I do? And when you do that, the world responds to you in kind. We all are a very aesthetic crowd. We all know that when we dress a certain way, it changes how we're perceived. And so you can have some fun with that. And if you're ever in a situation where you're feeling like you're ruminating, or you're struggling, or you're anxious, or you're at a conference and you don't know who to talk to, that writing exercise of narrating in the third person, do that as your inner monologue. The wizard looked out at the audience and noticed that everyone was nodding, and at that moment he hoped, I hope this has made sense for them. And man, that acid is kicking in. So ultimately, metafiction, what is it for? It's a metaphor. It's a way of thinking in these parallels and making these interesting moves in that in-dimensional space, of playing with the story of our life and letting ourselves be a little bit more of a character. And with that, the wizard paused his presentation to address the audience directly and say, yes, you're right, this has been a story the entire time. That aside was just my entire presentation, but we're still in the metafictional narrative. And now you just listen to Devin Person's lecture. So good. It's like I'm calling Cthulhu. Take a deep breath. Let these words soak in. In a moment, the lecture will end, and you will go create the story of the magic you experienced at the 2025 Occulture Conference. The end. But wait, there's more. I have a podcast that is a ritual, which is actually really a hypersigil, but you can check that out. There's more information there if you want to find me. I also wrote a frickin' book, and I have 4 copies on me. I like to say that I'm a very good wizard and a very poor capitalist, so interesting trades will be considered. So let me know. Come find me. You can also order it online, and it's print on demand, and some of the printers are in Europe, so I'm hoping that gets around tariffs, but who knows? Again, the world is broken. Fuck the world. Make your own story. Also, I created a free meditation. I have flyers on me if you don't have time to grab a pic of this, so come talk to me as well. And I will be completely transparent. This is all a scam for me to get your email, not so I can put you on an email list, but so I can send everybody who emails me some sort of weird personalized message, and then we'll see where that leads us, because everything leads to something. Thank you.